Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named MonsterLand Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The first story takes place in the sunset where the man began to play his trumpet. The powerful sound waves shattered the glass, deafeningly loud. The woman had nowhere to hide. She could only pick up an ice pick from the floor, and enduring excruciating pain, she deeply pierced her own eardrums. Finally, the entire world fell silent. Yet the sound of the trumpet did not fade. Instead, it grew clearer. The woman knew she could never escape this monster, knowing it was a curse, a retribution to her. The scene flashes back to 14 years ago when it was during a parade gathering. Musicians played their trumpets, keeping time with the music, mingling in the crowd of revelers. A boy named George sat on his stepfather's shoulders. The child wanted to walk around, but his playful nature soon led him to disappear into the crowd. His mother, Annie, was very worried. She grabbed the wandering George from the crowd. After the parade, George demanded ice cream, but Annie refused, citing that too much sugar would make him sick. The stepfather, who was a doctor, finally spoke up. After examining the boy, he assured that George was healthy and could have ice cream. Annie, who always listened to her husband, saw no reason to refuse. After lunch, the loving stepfather continued to carry young George on his shoulders without feeling tired at all. Annie followed closely behind them, but then ran into an old friend she hadn't seen in years. The friend kept talking to Annie, and seeing this, the husband said he would take George to the restroom and meet her at the front gate in 20 minutes. Annie wanted to follow, but her friend kept holding her back, continuing the conversation. The friend was envious of Annie's large diamond ring, admiring her for marrying a wealthy husband. More than half an hour later, Annie finally found her running son in the crowd. George seemed to have been frightened by something, and she could only comfort him softly. After a long while, the husband arrived, looking guilty. He said he had been searching everywhere for George. The boy's love of running around really put him in a bind. Under the parents' questioning, George said that a monster with black eyes had been chasing him. Naturally, Annie didn't believe her son's bullshit. The stepfather examined George and found his wrist badly twisted. The couple quickly rushed him to a children's hospital. The celebration continued, and among the crowd, a trumpet player revealed his black eyes, suggesting that George hadn't lied. He really saw the monster with black eyes. Time flies, and now it's 14 years later. Annie stood trembling by the window, holding a baseball bat. The house was pitch black. Her husband had just returned from a busy day at work and hadn't had the chance to apologize to his wife yet. Annie, panicking, told him that there was someone else in the house. The husband quietly followed her to the hall and asked who was there. Suddenly, the door opened and lights came on. It was a surprise party Annie had prepared to celebrate her husband's upcoming medical award. The guests were all having a great time. Even the old friend from 14 years ago had shown up. Time had changed everything. Annie was now a wealthy lady, subtly looking down on her friend. The friend mentioned how she had known Annie when she was a poor woman with nothing. Now that Annie had married a wealthy husband, lived in a mansion, and drove fancy cars, her friend's words made Annie a bit embarrassed. Young George had grown into a handsome young man and had moved to a school in California a few years ago. Halfway through the party, the husband's patients started to give speeches, all praising him. Then, a man wearing glasses nervously walked onto the stage. He mumbled, seemingly unprepared. The man said he didn't know the doctor but had come for his sister. He then questioned if the doctor remembered his sister, Julie. The smile on the doctor's face gradually faded, and he claimed to have never heard the name. Annie quickly stepped in to smooth things over, asking security to escort the man out. However, the man rushed forward and landed a heavy punch on the doctor. The man's outburst ruined the party, forcing Annie to awkwardly see off the guests. Their son, who had just arrived home, also found an excuse to leave hastily. Before leaving, the husband warmly bid his son goodbye. Later that night, Annie questioned her husband with a stern look on her face, demanding to know what's the deal with Julie. Her husband stammered, saying that Julie was his assistant at the hospital 13 years ago. She kept trying to get involved with him, but to avoid any trouble, he fired her immediately. In truth, Annie had known for a long time that her husband was no saint. But to maintain her wealthy lifestyle, she had turned a blind eye and a deaf ear to it all these years. Every time her husband faced a trust crisis, Annie would step up and cover for him. She warned him to be more discreet, emphasizing that they couldn't afford to lose everything they had worked so hard for because of his sex scandals. Seeing his wife being so understanding, her husband breathed a sigh of relief. Later that night, as Annie was sound asleep, the annoying sound of the trumpet began again. She got up and closed the window, trying to ignore it. The next morning, her husband had already left for work when Annie received a call from her friend. Her friend told her that something big had happened and urged her to check the news immediately. Annie, somewhat indifferent, found out that Julie had posted a video on social media accusing the doctor of assaulting her. Following this, more and more victims came forward, accusing the doctor of doing the same to them. They were all former patients, and while many of the accusations were beyond the statute of limitations, one victim was only 11 years old. This meant the doctor had preyed on a minor, and the law is particularly unforgiving when it comes to crimes against children. However, Annie seemed indifferent to what her husband had done, but when she heard that his award was revoked and his medical license suspended, she finally snapped. She furiously cursed those women, calling them vicious. They had only been assaulted, but her husband had lost his entire career. Her husband, crying pathetically like a crocodile baby, shamelessly begged Annie to help him. It turned out Julie was never his colleague, but a patient. Her husband, being a pediatrician, had been abusing his position for years. Over 40 victims had come forward to accuse him. The police soon took him away, and his career was undoubtedly over. Whether he would survive was another question altogether. As Annie listened to the victims' accusations on TV, she realized they had all once been children, the apples of their parents' eyes. Because she had condoned her husband's actions, Annie's reputation was ruined overnight. She kept explaining to her friends that she had no idea what her husband had been doing. At this point, her son George was her only family left. As night fell, the eerie sound of the trumpet started again, driving Annie to distraction. She closed the door, but then the trumpeter smashed the windows. Annie finally saw the monster's true face. He had been standing outside the window playing the trumpet all along, never leaving. Annie hurried outside to confront him, asking if he had broken the window. The man said nothing, just played his trumpet as he drew closer, revealing black eyes and sharp teeth. Annie picked up a rock and killed him. She struggled to drag the body into the cellar and hastily cleaned up the crime scene. Annie couldn't sleep, constantly calling her son, but George refused to answer her calls. That night, tormented and nearly breaking down, she heard noises coming from the cellar. Grabbing an ice pick for protection, she suddenly faced the monster as it burst out and bit her neck. Annie fought back, stabbing it several times. But the monster didn't die. It started playing the trumpet again, shattering the glass with deafening sound waves. Annie ran, but no matter where she went, she couldn't escape the terrifying figure. She hid in the cellar, trembling with the ice pick in hand. The cellar door opened, and a shadowy figure approached. As it came closer, Annie realized it was her son, George. He said he had come back as soon as he received her call. Annie told him about the black-eyed monster that had broken the window and tried to kill her. She asked if he remembered the monster from his childhood, the one that had haunted him with nightmares and woke him up screaming every night. Annie felt guilty for not believing her son back then, but now she had seen the monster too. George, however, said he had never seen any monster. He even wondered if his mother was hallucinating from drugs or alcohol. Looking at his frenzied mother, George finally lost his patience, declaring that there's no monster and asking her why she had been avoiding the truth all these years. It turned out that 14 years ago, during a parade, her husband had tried to hurt young George while Annie was distracted. George had been terrified but managed to break free from the man and run into his mother's arms. At the time, Annie was dirt poor and had just landed herself a wealthy husband. Naturally, she didn't want to lose this newfound stability, so she turned a deaf ear to her son's pleas. She thought her son would benefit from his stepfather's money, attend a prestigious school, and change his fate. But shadows of his childhood haunted him, making it impossible to fit in at school, and he failed every subject. It turned out the black-eyed monster George spoke of was actually his stepfather all along. Even now, Annie shamelessly refused to acknowledge the truth. George challenged her, asking if she felt no shame and if she really thought her husband was interested in a hotel maid. He pointed out that his stepfather was only interested in young George and Annie's willingness to turn a blind eye in exchange for wealth. For the sake of luxury, she had sold out her son, letting him spend his childhood sleepless and praying that his stepfather wouldn't come into his room. George waited for an apology, but Annie continued to evade reality, driving away her last remaining family. Just then, the dreaded trumpet sound pierced her nerves again, and Annie could no longer stand it. She grabbed an ice pick and punctured her eardrums, seeking peace in silence. But the trumpet sound never faded. It became even clearer. With her husband arrested and all their assets going to compensate the victims, Annie lost everything she had painstakingly built. At this moment, she finally accepted the truth. Covered in blood, she followed the monster through empty streets, past a graveyard and onto the street where the parade had taken place years ago, blending into a crowd of musicians. The story ends here. There had never been a monster. The monster George spoke of was Annie's husband, and the eerie trumpet sound was the truth Annie had buried in her subconscious. Tormented by her conscience, she was forced to face the reality of her husband's crimes, which had become a widespread scandal. For 14 years, she had been his accomplice, ignoring his atrocities. In the end, losing everything, including her son, Annie finally realized her mistakes. She punctured her eardrums and chose suicide to end it all, but her guilt would never faded. Passing the graveyard symbolized her death, accepting her fate and being engulfed by the truth she had long denied. The second story takes place in the dead of night when a woman is forcefully held underwater. Despite her frantic struggles, she eventually stops moving. The killer drags her lifeless body to the shore, then takes out a knife and meticulously removes her facial skin. His expression remains calm as he places the skin into a box and puts it in the trunk. The trunk is already filled with similar boxes, indicating this isn't his first time. Once in the car, he realizes he cut his face during the murder. The wound is deep, but he seems unfazed by the pain. He inserts his fingers into the cut, fiddles with it for a moment, and then calmly takes out a fishing line and a hook to stitch it up himself. The scene shifts to a lakeside cabin in Louisiana, where a single mother, Tony, is struggling to calm her agitated daughter. The girl has mental issues and often becomes violently uncontrollable. Life is tough for Tony, who has to manage her daughter's meltdowns, provide for their daily needs, and deal with overdue bills. The TV news reports a spate of kidnappings, with women disappearing without a trace. In a rush, Tony takes her daughter to the cheapest daycare available. However, due to her daughter's violent tendencies, the teacher suggests finding another place, but Tony can't afford it. With no financial support and facing constant judgment, she drops off her daughter and heads to her job at a restaurant. The news on TV continues to report on missing girls. The boss comments coldly that another one is gone. During the conversation, a rat gets caught in a trap, and a coworker throws it into a bucket of water. Watching the rat struggle triggers a flood of memories for Tony. In her youth, Tony had an unplanned pregnancy with her boyfriend, who turned out to be a playboy. Upon learning of the pregnancy, he disappeared the next day. Desperate, she sought help from friends. Due to the law regulation, she was unable to obtain the pills, so her friends suggested a dangerous alternative, laying a blanket on the floor and performing the procedure with a spike. Unable to bear the pain, she called off the makeshift surgery. Perhaps as a consequence of this ordeal, her daughter was born extremely volatile, prone to hysterical outbursts. On her daughter's 3rd birthday, Tony finally reached her ex-boyfriend. At her urging, he spent the day with them, unaware he had a child. Confused but willing, he brought a water gun as a gift, not knowing the child's gender. Despite their poverty, the little girl was delighted just to receive a present. Tony didn't want money from him. She wanted to build a family, but he was never interested in responsibility. That evening, when the daughter had another violent episode during her bath, the man lost his temper. First, he hit her, then slapped Tony. This slap brought her back to reality, and from that moment, she abandoned any hope of reconciling with him. The scene shifts back to reality. A peculiar customer enters the shop. It's the same man who killed the young girl as shown earlier. He orders a simple burger but leaves a 100 tip. Tony senses his ulterior motives. However, the man claims he just wants to chat. Needing the money, she accepts and sits down to talk with him. The man's name is Alex, and he quickly confesses his admiration for Tony, especially for her sexy body. Suddenly, a scream comes from the back. The daycare teacher, unable to handle Tony's daughter any longer, has brought her back. The teacher explains that the girl, acting like a madwoman, bit the mailman, covering everyone in blood. While the good news is that the daughter isn't hurt, the bad news is that Tony must now find a more expensive daycare. From birth, everyone has countless possibilities, but every decision narrows these down until they become who they are. After closing time, Alex returns to the restaurant. The boss thinks he's there to rob them, but he gently assures her he just wants Tony's address. Tony, having just put her daughter to sleep, hears a knock on the door. Alex offers $1,000 to stay the night. Considering the remote location with no hotels and needing the money, she agrees. Little does she know she's inviting a serial killer into her home. While tidying up, Tony notices the trunk full of boxes and curiously asks about them, but Alex refuses to answer. He seems to be hiding from something. Surprisingly, the daughter takes a liking to Alex, who reciprocates with kindness. The two lonely adults quickly connect through their juicy tongues, and after a passionate night, Alex asks her who she would be if she could be anyone in the world. Once, Tony had a promising life, but falling for a playboy and having his child stripped away all her possibilities, leaving her to struggle alone. Curious again, she asks about the boxes in his trunk, but he remains evasive. Driven by curiosity, Tony sneaks out with his car keys to investigate while he sleeps. As she opens one of the boxes, Alex's voice startles her from behind. He calmly offers to let her choose a box to see its contents. She picks a black one, and what she sees inside leaves her in shock. Tony begs him to spare her sexy life, especially for her daughter's sake. Alex coldly takes out a knife and approaches. Instead of harming her, he gruesomely peels off his own face, causing her to faint immediately. Tony wakes up on the sofa to find a female stranger in her home, wearing her clothes and having prepared a lavish breakfast. Confused, she asks about Alex. The stranger explains that she is Alex, but now in a different guise. She then shockingly reveals that Alex is not human, but a skin-changing creature, capable of becoming anyone by wearing their skin. Alex recounts his past with a demonic partner. Together they traveled, killing and skinning people to collect skins for their use. However, his partner became obsessed with killing, especially after murdering a young high school girl. Though they were the same kind, Alex had a rule to only kill middle-aged people. To end the madness, he drowned his partner after a skin change, but he knows the demon will return. Puzzled, Tony asks why he doesn't return the skins to his partner. Alex refuses, explaining that he too was once trapped in a poor small town with no money and a dead-end job. Changing skins allows him to live many lives, so why stop? He tells her that sometimes you must bear the burden of your own mistakes, leaving her deep in thought. After Alex leaves, Tony is still left with her harsh reality, a hysterical daughter and a life of poverty. She wonders if she could also leave it all behind and start anew just like Alex. She left the small town with her daughter and even gave herself a new name. She fabricated a whole new life for herself. To strangers, she claimed to be a nurse with a spacious house and a good income. These attractive descriptions made the strangers envious. However, her daughter's hysteria pulled her back to reality, and past events replayed in her mind. She still couldn't forget the past. There was a time when Tony believed she could truly start over as long as she had her daughter. Her life wouldn't change, and neither would her daughter's. A luxury car stopped in front of her. As she looked at her sleeping daughter, an evil plan began to form in her mind. She was still young and deserved a better life, free from these burdens. After much contemplation, Tony seized the moment when the car's owner was shopping. She hurriedly placed her sleeping daughter into the luxury car and left behind the $1,000 Alex had given her. Watching the bewildered car owner, Tony sped away. The car owner seemed decent, obviously from a wealthy family. Her daughter would surely have a good life with them. Tony cried like a giant baby as she imagined a better future for her daughter and herself. From birth, everyone has countless possibilities, but each decision you make narrows these possibilities until you become who you are today. The protagonist was still very young. If she hadn't fallen for a playboy, if she hadn't gotten pregnant, if she hadn't called off the surgery because of the pain, and if the surgery hadn't failed, perhaps her daughter would be healthy. She made too many wrong decisions, which ultimately shaped who she is now and caused her daughter's hysteria. Giving her daughter to a wealthy family was the best choice for both of them and the beginning of rewriting her destiny. The third story begins with a young man, Nick, who was browsing the internet when he suddenly noticed a strange shadow behind him. Terrified, he opened the door after a long while, only to find the shadow still lurking in the corner. He asked the shadow where it came from, but it remained silent. Nick tried to communicate by making shadow puppets in the light, and the shadow mimicked his movements. Confused, Nick took a photo of the shadow and posted it online, seeking answers, wondering where this shadow came from. Nick was a self-conscious young man. He always stayed in the corner, watching his peers laugh and play, but never joining because of his reclusive nature. One day, Nick went to the supermarket to buy medicine for his mother, only to be told that her health insurance had expired. He searched his pockets and found only $38, enough for just 4 pills. On his way home, Nick passed by a repair shop where his father used to work, now filled with overdue bills. At home, Nick had hung bells everywhere. In the dark room, his mother, paralyzed from a stroke, lay bedridden for days. The 4 pills couldn't sustain her condition, so Nick cut them in half. He then put the stolen burger and fries from a restaurant into the microwave for his mother's dinner. Nick's father had abandoned them long ago, leaving Nick to shoulder the family's burden alone. Despite the hardships, Nick tried to maintain a facade of tranquility to keep his mother happy. He told her he was doing well at school and had many friends, but in reality, he had dropped out because he couldn't afford the tuition. When his mother expressed a desire to meet his friends, Nick made up an excuse. Poor and self-conscious, he had no friends. After dinner, Nick put his mother to bed. Her lower body was paralyzed, so he had hung bells everywhere to ensure she could call him whenever she needed. Once she slept, Nick played online games with his friends. But soon, his teammates logged off to be with their wives, leaving Nick feeling lonely. He went to the bathroom, unaware that a shadow had slowly emerged in the corner behind him. The shadow stood there silently. Nick was startled, but found the shadow to be harmless, even mimicking his shadow puppets. He took a photo of the shadow and posted it online, hoping for answers. At that moment, the bell above suddenly rang. It turned out Nick's mother had a nightmare. Paralyzed from the waist down and abandoned by her husband, she had no sense of security. After much effort, Nick finally managed to soothe her back to sleep. Returning to his room, Nick found that the shadow had disappeared. His post had already received many replies, and the sudden attention made him a bit excited. A group called Shadow Watch reached out to him. It turned out these people had all encountered shadows before. One tattooed guy mentioned that his cousin had a shadow in his house. Since then, his cousin's business went downhill rapidly, and within a year he went from being a factory owner to a homeless man. The group leader said that in his experience, shadows bring bad luck and feed on the weak. Anyone who encounters them is doomed to misfortune. The group leader continued, asking if Nick was feeling like his life was terrible, and that's all the shadow's doing. A girl in the group chimed in, saying that she had a shadow in her house too. After that, her dad got fired from his job, bought a gun, and killed her mom. The more they talked, the more ominous it seemed. Some even speculated that the shadow's goal was to drive humans to despair and take over the world. That night, Nick tossed and turned in bed. Eventually, he went to the garage, opened his father's old truck, and clung to some old clothes, reminiscing about his father's scent. He slept in the truck until sunrise, only to realize he had overslept. Nick hurriedly prepared breakfast and medication for his mother, even though he was going to be late. His mother kept ringing the bell, driving him to distraction. After finishing everything, Nick rushed to the restaurant where he worked, only to be fired by his boss. The boss had known for a while that Nick was stealing burgers, and combined with his frequent tardiness, he had had enough. Nick explained that he had to take care of his bedridden mother and begged for leniency. The boss responded that life was hard for everyone, including Nick's co-workers, and that the restaurant was a business, not a charity. Frustrated, Nick cursed and vented all his life's frustrations. The boss, though seemingly heartless, was right. No one should have to pay for someone else's hardships. Moreover, the boss had turned a blind eye to Nick's thefts for a long time. Feeling defeated, Nick went to the auto repair shop to ask his father's former colleagues about his father's whereabouts. However, these events were from 15 years ago, and no one remembered how to contact him. Despite being ridiculed outside, Nick forced a smile at home and told his mother he had a good day, only facing some minor problems at school. His mother asked him to brush her hair, but as he picked up the comb, he saw the shadow again. It hadn't disappeared. It was hiding under his mother's bed. That evening, Nick went back online and mentioned the shadow to his group friends. The group leader said the shadow must now be targeting his mother and causing much trouble to him. He suggested Nick get rid of it. Nick questioned this, saying the shadow hadn't done anything and maybe he was just unlucky. The group leader dismissed this as nonsense, saying no one could be this unlucky, and everything Nick was experiencing is because of the shadow. The tattooed guy shared that his father left when he was 12, and his life became a mess, leading him to contemplate suicide. Luckily, the group leader found his post online, and the group's support helped him through that difficult time. Though he had never seen a shadow, he felt that his life was definitely manipulated by one. The group leader admitted he hadn't seen a shadow either, but his brother had. His brother broke his leg in a skiing accident and became addicted to painkillers, eventually dying from an overdose a year later. In the dead of night, Nick surrounded his bed with small lights to ward off the shadow. All his group friends had left the chat room, except for one girl who stayed to keep him company. Nick shared that his mother, a longtime alcoholic, had suddenly suffered a stroke. To earn money for her care, Nick had to drop out of school and work, yet he still couldn't afford her medical expenses. His father had abandoned them when Nick was just 5 years old, and Nick hated him for it. But given the current situation, he had no choice but to find his father for help. The girl understood Nick's plight because her circumstances were strikingly similar. In the early hours, the shadow reappeared on the ceiling, and Nick had to chase it away with a flashlight. The shadow frantically darted around the room. Then the bell rang again. His stroke-stricken mother had fallen off the bed. Nick had no choice but to call for help. The doctor said her condition had worsened, and clearly the half dose of medicine Nick was giving her was ineffective. The home internet had also been cut off due to unpaid bills. With no job and no classmates, his group friends were his only mental support. To stay connected with them, Nick went to the school library and logged into the chat room. He vented to his friends about having to pawn things just to pay for internet. The group leader insisted that Nick needed to get rid of the shadow quickly, or his bad luck would continue. It's worth noting that Nick had never met any of his group friends in person. Their interactions were solely online, and their physical meeting was just Nick's imagination. Since Nick was no longer a student, his sneaky behavior caught the librarian's attention, and security promptly kicked him out. Encouraged by his group friends, Nick decided to eliminate the shadow. Using his strong DIY skills, he cobbled together a high-power flashlight. The group leader said that since the shadow had chosen Nick, he had to face it alone. This meant that no one would help him, as they all lived far away and had no reason to come to his aid. Their support was purely verbal, and when it came to action, everyone found excuses. Nick hesitated, wondering if the shadow was truly harmless. But his friends called him a coward, saying that if he didn't want to kill the shadow, he had to leave the group. Feeling helpless, since his group friends were his only support, Nick reluctantly agreed. Mid-conversation, the group leader suddenly sent some photos, suggesting that they had found Nick's father. He had a new family now, living in a spacious house, enjoying a life Nick could only envy. Nick couldn't believe how his father, who had abandoned his mother and him, could live so happily while he suffered under the shadow's curse. Driven mad, Nick imagined his group friends coming to his house, armoring him up for battle. He live-streamed the entire process via webcam, then engaged in a life-or-death struggle with the shadow. Each flash of light caused the shadow to scream in agony. It was a solo fight, like a one-person shooter game. Nick pressed on relentlessly, forcing the shadow to retreat. The bell rang continuously, with his mother calling for him. Finally, cornered, the shadow surrendered, begging for mercy. But blinded by rage, Nick pulled the trigger. The story abruptly ends here. The episode's deep metaphor sparked endless speculation. Some viewers believed the shadow didn't exist at all. Nick's misfortunes were due to his ailing mother. Dropping out of school and working tirelessly to afford her medication, the shadow symbolized his mother. Nick killing the shadow implied he killed his mother. Others thought the shadow represented Nick himself, his side that avoided facing reality, highlighted by the opening scene where Nick cast a duck-shaped shadow with his hands, mirrored by the shadow. Crushed by life's pressures, killing the shadow hinted at Nick's suicide. The fourth story begins with Sean and her partner Kate, who were both university lecturers and loved debating in front of their students passionately. Despite their fierce classroom debates, they were very close in private. 16 years later, to celebrate their wedding anniversary, Kate booked 2 plane tickets to Italy without consulting Sean, planning a trip for the following month. Sean wasn't keen on going, but forced a smile and accepted to avoid upsetting her. At home, a drunken Kate forgot the house alarm code, triggering the alarm. Sean had to frantically explain the situation to the police over the phone. To her dismay, Kate grabbed a corkscrew to keep drinking. Unable to stop her, Sean reluctantly agreed to have another drink with her, locking away all sharp objects to prevent any harm. It turns out Kate had a history of severe bipolar disorder, with episodes of running around naked, screaming, and attempting suicide, all requiring heavy medication. 16 years ago, before they married, Kate had confessed her condition to Sean, even suggesting they break up to spare him the burden. But Sean, deeply in love, believed her love could conquer all. Now, after 16 years, it was clear she had overestimated her ability to cope. They had even adopted a daughter, but Kate's unpredictable moods were a constant challenge. One moment she was fine, the next she was hysterically blaming Sean, sending their daughter to boarding school without any notice. Sean had no choice. Kate had attempted to kill herself 3 times that year alone. Their daughter, returning home, never knew what to expect, finding her mother passed out in vomit or bleeding from self-inflicted wounds. To give their daughter a better environment, Sean sent her away, sparking another of Kate's manic episodes. She alternately called herself a failure and blamed Sean for not being supportive enough. Kate's condition had worsened significantly, and she had long since quit her job to stay home and recuperate. The entire family relied solely on Sean's income. Now, without any prior discussion, Kate had booked plane tickets. Sean couldn't possibly take time off work to accompany her on a trip. When Kate heard that Sean couldn't go on vacation with her, she threw an even bigger tantrum. With work the next day, Sean had no time to placate her and went to bed on her own. In the dead of night, Sean suddenly woke up to find Kate missing from their bed. She hurriedly opened the bathroom door and was horrified to see her partner in the bathtub, wrists slashed. This was her 4th attempt that year. Sean was utterly exhausted. A dark thought crossed her mind. She didn't save her, but instead closed the bathroom door and walked away. 15 years ago, in the first year of their marriage, Sean had already consulted a psychologist, unable to bear the torment. She had confessed to the doctor that if Kate truly wanted to die, perhaps it was best to let her. Sean sat by the bed all night, staring at the stain of wine Kate had spilled, resembling blood. The sight was chilling. She scrubbed the stain furiously, consumed by guilt. She thought Kate was surely dead this time. But as dawn broke, Kate emerged from the bathroom as if nothing had happened. She asked what had occurred and why she was soaking wet. Sean was terrified but also relieved, her guilt momentarily lifted. Yet the deep wounds on Kate's wrists reminded him of the grim reality. She knew such deep cuts were fatal, but for now she was just glad she was back. She lied, telling her she had fallen asleep like a pig in the bathtub. Kate's body was cold to the touch. She went to the bathroom and asked why there was so much blood in the tub. Sean lied again, saying it was just rust from the pipes. Since her return, Kate had changed completely. She was calm and no longer threw tantrums or stopped Sean from going to work. Despite having a major project that day, Sean couldn't stop worrying about Kate. After work, she rushed home to find Kate sitting in the dark, silent and motionless like a zombie. After a long silence, Kate finally spoke. She had been looking at their wedding photos, but couldn't remember any of their friends and family, not even her own mother. Sean patiently reintroduced everyone to her, just as she had done before. The next morning, as Sean prepared for work, she saw Kate sitting in the dark, her hair falling out in clumps. She knew she was decomposing. Kate suddenly expressed a desire to go for a walk, but it was clearly inappropriate for a corpse to stroll down the street. Sean canceled all her appointments, put a hat on Kate, and turned on the radio to ease the awkwardness. To her horror, the music made Kate scream wildly, forcing Sean to turn it off. Clearly, Kate no longer fit into the world of the living. Sean prepared a lavish breakfast, but Kate sat opposite him, her face pale and her spirit waning. She nodded off, and when her head drooped, an eyeball fell into her plate. Sean was stunned at the sight of her empty eye socket. Just then, the doorbell rang. She quickly hid Kate and put an eye patch on her to cover her peeping eye. It was their neighbor who had heard Kate's screams, thinking that a pig was being slaughtered. The neighbor had seen Kate's outbursts before and was no longer surprised by her hysteria. The neighbor warned Sean to keep Kate under control so she wouldn't scare the neighborhood children. After finally getting rid of the neighbor, Sean noticed dirt scattered all over the room. Kate had destroyed the potted plants, using the soil to form a circle. She was hiding under the bed, refusing to come out. She craved darkness and soil, longing for peace, but Sean wouldn't leave her alone. Ignoring Kate's desperate pleas, Sean dragged her out from under the bed. They struggled until sunset. Sean wouldn't let Kate go outside or be alone, making her feel like a prisoner. Suddenly, Kate remembered what had happened that night. Sean had ignored her suicide attempt, letting her bleed out in the bathtub. Sean had abandoned her, but then regretted it and went to great lengths to keep her around, even in death, refusing to let her rest. They slept in the dirt that night. While Sean was asleep, Kate quietly slipped out, barefoot, onto the snowy streets. She wanted to escape and find a moment of peace. Despite her decaying body, she stumbled along until her stinky foot broke off. Even so, she struggled on until she reached a cemetery. Digging a hole with her hands in front of a tombstone, she lay down inside, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace and satisfaction. But her peace was short-lived. Sean, flashlight in hand, found her and dragged her back home. She finally relented, realizing Kate just wanted to play in the dirt. Sean set up a space for her in the basement, bringing her soil and dead mice as toys. Kate continued to decay, unable to speak, becoming a walking corpse. Yet Sean, as if she were still alive, lay beside her every day, chatting with her without a hormone yoga session. 13 years ago, in the 3rd year of their marriage, Kate had shown signs of suicidal thoughts. She would play with dirt, plant flowers, and care for small animals. She had told Sean that if she died, they wouldn't argue every day, she wouldn't have to face the neighbors' strange looks, and she wouldn't suffer from her illness. To comfort her, they adopted a daughter. However, due to Kate's issues, Sean eventually had to send their child to boarding school. The scene shifts to the present. Their daughter unexpectedly returns home early from boarding school, finding the house in disarray. Sean excitedly hugs her, but she only smells the stench of decay on him. Enthusiastically, she tells Sean about her wonderful life at school, how she joined the debate team, carrying on her adoptive mother's legacy. Looking at her vibrant daughter, Sean is reminded of her deceased partner and bursts into tears like a giant baby. For 16 years, Sean and Kate's marriage had been a series of arguments and struggles. Now, it was all gone. The metaphor here is that after that fateful argument, Kate died because Sean didn't save her. Sean and their daughter had long since buried her, as evidenced by Kate going to the cemetery at night, and there's already a tombstone where she lies. What's more, their daughter doesn't ask about her adoptive mother, indicating she knows Kate is dead. Sean's guilt and longing for Kate led to severe mental issues. She exhumed Kate's body, imagining she was still alive, projecting her personality. Kate had bipolar disorder, which tormented Sean, but she was also sick, forcing her partner to do things she didn't want to do. Sean's selfishness and inability to let go of her love for Kate kept disturbing her, even in death. The fifth story begins with a loser named Sharko, who spent his days scavenging for scraps to survive. But today was different because he discovered a mermaid lying on the beach, but her sexy body was covered in black oil. Sharko poked her with a stick a couple of times without hormone mercy, but she didn't move, suggesting that this was a real mermaid. Even if he chopped her up and sold the meat, he could make a lot of money. Thinking of this, Sharko hurriedly transported the mermaid back to his rundown apartment. He filled the bathtub with ice and placed the mermaid inside. Looking at his own reflection in the mirror, Sharko was lost in memories. The Black Sea, the oil company's spill, had brought devastation to all marine life. Sharko was a fisherman, but the pollution had killed all the fish nearby. Not just him, but all the fishermen in town had been without income for a long time. Sharko had written letters to the government, complaining about the oil company's actions, but the politicians and businessmen were in cahoots, and all his letters went unanswered. A few months ago, while cleaning oil off his boat, Sharko had slipped and fallen into a pool of chemicals, leaving him permanently disabled. He was once nicknamed Shark because he was an excellent swimmer and a master fisherman. But now, he could no longer fish. He was blind in one eye, lame in one leg, and dragged around an oxygen tank all day. Even surviving was a struggle. The town's fishermen looked down on him, and even the local thugs would come around, thinking since Sharko couldn't fish anymore, they could borrow his Tesla boat. But Sharko refused. The boat was his lifeline. He still dreamed of one day recovering and setting sail again. His memories ended as he looked at the mermaid in the bathtub. Sharko felt a new hope and began to sing and dance, imagining how the mermaid would bring him back to his former glory. Late into the night, living alone, Sharko suddenly heard a noise from the bathroom. The mermaid wasn't dead after all. She broke free from the oil and showed a terrifying expression. Sharko was terrified. He grabbed his hunting rifle, but the mermaid was too strong. In the struggle, Sharko was badly bitten. He used a fishing net to bind the mermaid and even considered shooting her, but at that moment, the mermaid used her magic on him. Sharko became entranced. This was a precious mermaid. He spent his meager savings to buy raw meat from the supermarket and carefully cut away the net from her mouth, feeding her the meat. Exhausted, Sharko went to a bar to relax. Inside, a young man was boasting about encountering a group of mermaids during a sea expedition. The mermaids circled his boat, making terrifying noises due to hunger. The young man was dragged into the water by the mermaids, who started tearing at his body until his colleague fired shots into the sea, scaring them off and saving his life. The bar patrons laughed, dismissing it as a daydream, saying he mistook a group of sharks for mermaids. The young man, undeterred, showed his scars from the mermaid bites. The bar was filled with laughter, but Sharko just smiled silently. Late at night, Sharko sat in the living room drinking beer and watching TV. He suddenly thought that if the mermaid gets bored. So he moved the TV to the bathroom and watched Daniel C.C. horror movies with the mermaid. She couldn't talk, but Sharko chatted away anyway until the TV turned to static and he dozed off. In the darkness, the mermaid eyed Sharko's neck hungrily, baring her sharp teeth. But just then, Sharko woke up. There was a noise in the living room. Sharko had forgotten to lock the door, and the thug from earlier, angry that Sharko wouldn't lend him the Tesla boat, had snuck in to steal the keys. Now just a disabled man, Sharko was no match for the thug. The thug wasn't afraid in the least. Hearing noises from the bathroom, he shoved Sharko aside and saw the mermaid in the bathtub. The thug was stunned, seeing a live mermaid. Just the tail could fetch 10,000. The thug wanted to sell the mermaid with Sharko, but under the mermaid's spell, Sharko had changed his mind. He only wanted to release her back to the sea once she recovered. The thug, seemingly moved by Sharko's kindness, set up a large fish tank in Sharko's house the next morning. Sharko hoped the thug would keep the secret and not tell anyone about the discovery of the mermaid. The thug hesitated. This was a precious mermaid, and selling her could lead to great fortune and a wealthy life. The beautiful mermaid finally moved from the cramped bathtub to a spacious fish tank. In the days that followed, Sharko prepared exquisite food for the mermaid every day. While eating, he chatted with the mermaid, lamenting his own misfortunes and reminiscing about his past glories. The mermaid didn't speak. Her eyes gleamed with a fierce light, focused on the delicious-looking creature in front of her. With just a glance, she could once again plunge Sharko into a mesmerizing illusion. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. The visitor was a beautiful, unfamiliar woman. Her voice was gentle and sweet as she asked Sharko if he remembered her. He had once saved her life on the beach. Staring at the now empty fish tank, Sharko suddenly realized this was the mermaid he had saved. Her tail had transformed into slender legs. She expressed her gratitude to Sharko, saying that no one else cared about their fate, not the oil company, not the greedy politicians. Only Sharko, who wrote to the government time and again, even though his letters went unanswered. The mermaid removed Sharko's oxygen tube and healed his disabilities with her powers. This was her way of repaying him. Sharko's wish had come true. In the days that followed, he and the beautiful mermaid lived a carefree and happy life. During their leisure time, he constantly shared his future dreams with the mermaid. He was not disabled, nor was he the child of immigrant parents. He declared that his name was Shark, the king of the ocean. He wanted to return to the sea, catch many fish, and earn lots of money. Sharko said that since his disability, he had often thought of ending his life. Until he met the mermaid, his life had reignited with hope. However, their happy days were soon shattered. The thug had spread the news of Sharko finding the mermaid far and wide. Local fishermen surrounded Sharko's house, leaving no way out. Sharko put on his clothes and grabbed his hunting rifle. All the fish within miles had died, leaving the fishermen hungry. They hoped Sharko would sell the mermaid and share the wealth. Sharko firmly told everyone that the mermaid was his catch, and she belonged to him alone. If they couldn't feed themselves, they should find work. As the tension escalated, Sharko raised his rifle, ready to defend his property to the death. He was the king of the ocean. No one could take his catch away. Seeing Sharko's anger, the crowd reluctantly dispersed. Dragging his oxygen tube, Sharko returned to his house. As dawn broke, he watched the mermaid swim freely, and he could almost smell the ocean. The sky was so blue, the water so clear, and seagulls flew overhead. He brought a ladder, eagerly climbed into the fish tank, and held hands with the mermaid in the illusion, diving into the beautiful sea together. They embraced underwater, but the next moment, the mermaid bit Sharko's neck. Sharko didn't love the mermaid, he only saw her as a catch. Coincidentally, the mermaid saw him the same way. The mermaid never used her powers to heal Sharko. Everything was an illusion she created. Once outside the house, Sharko still needed to drag his heavy oxygen tank. The mermaid hated humans. If not for humans destroying their habitat, she wouldn't have ended up like this. She once felt pity, understanding the difference between one meal and a lifetime of hunger. But when Sharko said in the illusion that he wanted to return to the sea and catch more fish, perhaps that was when the mermaid's killing intent truly awakened. However, Sharko found relief, dying in a beautiful illusion, no longer disabled, no longer lonely. The sixth story takes place in a blood-soaked forest, where 5 young girls have lost their lives here so far, all beheaded without exception. Because of this, the forest has become a forbidden zone for the residents. 2 young girls, Lauren and Elena, grew up in the small town, and since childhood, they were told by the adults never to go into that forest. On the surface, they seemed like best friends, but in reality, Elena always treated the dowdy and timid Lauren like a servant. Elena was beautiful and particularly popular with the boys, something Lauren envied. After doing her makeup and hair, Elena pulled out a horror novel, which was based on the murders that took place in the town's forest. The 5 girls who were killed were all young and beautiful, and the killer was a lumberjack from that forest. At that moment, Elena's new boyfriend sneaked in, and the two began to passionately show their affection. Elena told Lauren to leave them alone for a bit. Lauren was bewildered. This was her house. If anyone should leave, it should be them. But she didn't dare say it out loud, instead using the excuse that her mother was downstairs and she didn't want to wake her. So Elena suggested Lauren hide in the wardrobe for a while. Being a people-pleaser, Lauren obediently climbed into the wardrobe, allowing Elena and her boyfriend to cozy up on her smelly bed. By the time Elena opened the wardrobe, Lauren had fallen asleep from exhaustion, and the boyfriend had left. Elena then proposed an even bolder idea to explore the forest together. Lauren didn't dare to go, fearing her mother would break her legs if she found out. Lauren's mother didn't love her, only smoked and drank and was abusive. Seeing Lauren's reluctance, Elena, slightly annoyed, packed her things and decided to go alone. The next day after school, Lauren came home to find 2 police officers and Elena's mother waiting. It turns out, Elena had gone missing after entering the forest and never returned. Lauren mentioned that Elena often smoked, drank, skipped school, and got into trouble. She wanted to tell the police that Elena had gone to the forest, but seeing the tears in Elena's mother's eyes, she hesitated. Elena's mother held her hand so gently, a stark contrast to her own abusive mother. At that moment, Lauren wanted to take Elena's place. So she withheld Elena's whereabouts from the police. Fast forward 10 years, the blood-soaked forest remains as eerie as ever. The once dowdy and timid Lauren had transformed. She now sported curly hair and wore exquisite makeup. She was walking down the aisle, supported by Elena's mother. Her future husband was none other than Elena's old boyfriend. Today was their wedding rehearsal, and Lauren relished everything she had now. But the mystery of Elena's disappearance lingered. Guests discussed the forest again, mentioning that the police had recently found a woman's skeleton there, missing its head. Everyone speculated whether the skeleton could be Elena. 2 catty bridesmaids gossiped about Lauren behind her back. They revealed that years ago, Lauren's birth mother had kicked her out, and it was Elena's mother who took her in. Lauren accepted Elena's mother as her godmother, lived in Elena's house, enjoyed the motherly love that was originally Elena's, and even took Elena's boyfriend. The bridesmaids planned to tell Elena's mother about the skeleton found in the forest. Lauren's expression suddenly darkened. She didn't seem to want her godmother to know about it. After the party, Elena's mother remained as kind and gentle as ever. Lauren hesitated, wanting to say something, but her godmother pulled out a wedding gift for Lauren. Whether out of fear of upsetting her godmother or for other reasons, Lauren swallowed the words she was about to say. After the wedding rehearsal, it came to Lauren's actual wedding day. As she was getting ready, the 2 pesky bridesmaids started causing trouble again, sharing the latest police update that had revealed the skeleton found in the forest matched Elena's age and the time of her disappearance. Annoyed by the downers, Lauren bluntly told them to shut up their smelly mouths and enjoy a sweet wedding ceremony. Elena's mother had prepared a beautiful wedding dress for Lauren, truly treating her as her own daughter. Seeing Lauren's happiness, the bridesmaids couldn't help but feel furious. Before Elena disappeared, she had been their best friend, and over the past 10 years, Lauren had seemingly stolen Elena's life. They speculated about what might have happened. They imagined that when Elena suggested they explore the forest together, Lauren didn't refuse. During their secret adventure, Elena, always the prankster, pretended to be a ghost to scare Lauren. Angry and frightened, Lauren pushed Elena, accidentally impaling her on a branch. Panicking, Lauren supposedly decapitated Elena to stage a murder scene. Their theory seemed plausible, but they had no proof. To force Lauren to confess, they brought in Lauren's abusive, alcoholic birth mother. Lauren was shocked. This woman had abandoned her long ago, so why show up on her wedding day? Her mother insulted her with vile language and even accused her of killing Elena. She claimed that on the night of Elena's disappearance, she saw Elena and Lauren leaving together, and when Lauren returned, her clothes were muddy. Lauren tried to explain, but her mother slapped her hard, shattering everything Lauren had worked for. Facing Elena's mother's questioning, Lauren finally revealed another version of the truth. That night, she did go to the forest with Elena, who, true to her playful nature, hid and made laughing sounds to scare Lauren. But the laughter soon turned to chicken screams. Frightened, Lauren called out for her several times with no response and eventually left the forest alone. Envious of Elena's kind mother, she chose to hide everything from the police and assumed Elena's life. The bridesmaids didn't believe Lauren's version of the truth and insisted she was the killer. Disappointed, Elena's mother left Lauren alone. The bridesmaids had achieved their goal. They had paid Lauren's birth mother to ruin her wedding. As for the truth, neither the bridesmaids nor the birth mother cared. Happiness built on lies is just a bubble, bound to burst. Lauren felt alienated and disoriented, as if she were back in the forest in her wedding dress. Although Elena hadn't been the best friend, she was Lauren's only friend. Yet Lauren had abandoned her in the forest, leaving her to die alone. In a way, Lauren was indeed the murderer. Filled with guilt, she resolved to find Elena and return everything to her. As she ran, she spotted an old witch standing in the darkness, seemingly waiting for her. The witch led her to a dilapidated cabin filled with dust and lumberjack tools in the corner. Lauren confessed that she didn't deserve her husband, the wedding dress, or the life she had now. The witch then shared her own story. Many years ago, the witch had fallen in love with a blonde boy who brought her to this forest and tricked her into undressing. Once she was naked, he pushed her out of the car and drove off. Lost in the freezing forest, she was injured and eventually stayed there, transforming into what she was now. She said, "The world is cruel, and only those who refuse to accept their fate and claw their way up can change their destiny and find happiness." During their conversation, a figure returned to the cabin. It was Elena, missing for 10 years. It turns out the witch had abducted her, wanting a daughter but treating her as a slave. Elena hadn't aged a day. Her vocal cords had frozen, rendering her mute. The witch suddenly began to beat Elena, screaming that she was her mother and Elena must obey her. Lauren wanted to rescue Elena, but the witch proposed a deal. Lauren had to give up everything she had built and stay as the witch's slave. Elena was overjoyed upon hearing this and wrote a plea for help on a chalkboard, hoping Lauren would take her place. Looking at the dirty Elena and the decaying cabin, Lauren hesitated. In the end, she chose to leave, abandoning her guilt. At that moment, Lauren felt reborn, entirely transformed. All her anxiety and guilt vanished. This concludes the story. The truth can be deduced that Lauren and Elena did go to the forest, where a deranged lumberjack had been hiding. Elena, playing a prank in the dark, was abducted and killed by the lumberjack. The lumberjack tools in the cabin hinted at this. Driven by selfishness, Lauren didn't save Elena and let her die alone. The headless skeleton found by the police 10 years later was indeed Elena's. The scenes of Lauren returning to the forest in her wedding dress were fantasies in her mind. The witch symbolized her abusive, alcoholic birth mother. The cast list even showed that the witch and Lauren's birth mother were played by the same actress. The dilapidated cabin symbolized her former disastrous life, and Elena staying with the witch represented Lauren's past self. Elena's damaged vocal cords hinted at Lauren's past inability to resist, express dissatisfaction, or leave. Lauren felt guilty, believing everything she had now was stolen. She considered giving it all up, but remembering her mother's violent temper and her own miserable past, she decided to let go of her guilt and enjoy her current life. After all, Elena was dead, and it would be a waste not to use the resources left behind. As the witch said, the world is cruel to some, and only those who refuse to accept their fate and fight their way up can change their destiny and achieve happiness. The seventh story takes place in February when a group of angels fell into the sinful city of New Jersey. They scattered across the city and no one knew where they came from. People even doubted they were angels because they looked so ugly, more like monsters. There was a man named Brian staring blankly at a pile of toys. After much deliberation, he chose a doll. As the cashier rang him up, she accidentally dropped a few coins. The sharp, clinking sound pierced Brian's nerves. He hurriedly gathered his things and left the supermarket, almost fleeing. On his way home, he passed a dance studio. He intentionally avoided looking at the joyful children dancing inside. Christmas was fast approaching, and Brian carefully wrapped the doll as a gift, placing it under the Christmas tree at home. Then he sat alone, drinking sullenly into the night. Finally, his wife came home from work. She was a police officer, always busy. She chattered on about the bizarre incidents at work, then changed into casual clothes, wanting to attend a therapy group with her husband. This group was for parents who had lost their children. It turned out their child had gone missing a few years ago, neither alive nor dead, leaving Brian with a deep sense of guilt and putting a heavy strain on their marriage. Brian didn't want to attend the therapy group. He felt those people had lost their children, whereas his child was only missing, not dead. His wife, seeing she couldn't convince him, went alone. After she left, Brian visited a psychologist. Under hypnosis, he recalled the day his daughter went missing. He had picked her up from the dance studio, bought her an ice cream cone, and while picking up some coins from the ground, she was abducted by a black van in the blink of an eye. With the help of the hypnotist, Brian finally remembered the van's license plate number. He took it to the police station, hoping his wife's colleagues could investigate. They reluctantly agreed, thinking it was just a number from his dream. Meanwhile, his wife was at the therapy group, sharing that her daughter loved ballet and was only 8 when she disappeared. Before she could finish, others questioned her motives. They accused her of hoping her child was dead since she was attending the group instead of searching for her. Hurt by their words, she left the meeting. On her way back, she received a call from a colleague who said the license plate number Brian provided was non-existent. She felt helpless, realizing her husband was still secretly searching for their daughter. As she walked home, eerie cries filled her ears, and she saw a figure in a ballet dress flash by. Recognizing it as her missing daughter, she chased the cries to a dark alley where a homeless man's cart held a bloody angel's head. It must have been her longing for her daughter playing tricks on her mind. Back home, she threw away their daughter's favorite markers, which infuriated Brian. She believed their daughter was dead and they needed to move on, but Brian refused to give up. This led to a heated argument, ending their conversation on a bitter note. One day, while tidying his daughter's room, Brian received a call from a private investigator. After the police investigation yielded no results, Brian had given the license plate number to the detective. The investigator worked swiftly, providing Brian with the car owner's address. However, in no time, Brian's wife received a notification saying that Brian had been caught peeping at the car owner's house and was reported to the police. Fortunately, the charges were dropped. This was puzzling since her colleague said that the license plate led nowhere earlier. So, how did the private investigator find the car owner's address? The colleague hesitantly explained that the car owner was not in town on the day their daughter went missing. The colleague grumbled that Brian was just causing trouble for the police. Influenced by this, Brian's wife also started to think her husband had lost his mind over their daughter. She believed finding their daughter was the police's job and that an unemployed man like him, wandering around aimlessly, couldn't accomplish anything. Brian was furious and retorted that the police didn't care about their child's fate. In truth, it wasn't that his wife didn't miss their daughter. Brian spent his days drinking and sleeping, while she worked 2 jobs to support them. She just wanted to return to a normal life as quickly as possible. It was bad enough that outsiders misunderstood her, but her husband's lack of understanding was too much. She asked for a divorce, claiming she had fallen in love with someone else, the leader of the therapy group. She hoped Brian would accept reality and move on with her, but he couldn't. If he stopped searching for their daughter, it meant she was truly dead in his mind. Feeling depressed, Brian went to a bar to drown his sorrows. The female bartender, who was actually Tony, as shown previously, offered Brian some hormone services to make extra money, but he showed her his wedding ring, saying he's married. After a few drinks, they began discussing their troubles. Tony, young and naive back then, had gotten pregnant before marriage and abandoned her child as shown earlier, hoping it would change her fate. Instead, she ended up right back where she started. Now, she constantly heard phantom cries of her child, and the guilt of abandoning her child tormented her like a nightmare. One day, she saw a drug dealer on the street and learned that fallen angels' blood could induce hallucinogenic states, making people feel euphoric. Many people would chop up angels to sell the substance. Desperate, she bought and swallowed 2 pills. The world started spinning, but instead of comfort, the angel's blood intensified her guilt. She saw her true self in the mirror, a monstrous mother who abandoned her child, a creature wearing human skin. Just then, the clinking sound of dropping coins once again unsettled Brian. He hurriedly left the bar, almost as if he were fleeing. On the way back, Brian saw in the distance a small figure in a ballet dress running frantically. He hurried to catch up. Following the figure, he arrived at a trash bin where he found a weak, naked angel shivering in the cold. Without hesitation, Brian took the injured angel home. The angel looked terrified. Brian's wife suggested not calling the police, fearing they would take the poor creature away. The couple lamented how angels, benevolent beings, were being chopped up and sold by some evil humans. They settled the angel in their daughter's room and took great care of it. In gratitude, the angel shared its blood with the couple. Tasting the euphoria-inducing blood, they became dazed and entered a hallucinogenic state. In this surreal realm, the wife vented her frustration. Their daughter had been missing for over a year with little hope of survival, yet her husband remained in a prolonged state of grief. She smashed the Christmas gifts and chopped down the tree, while Brian beat his chest in remorse, blaming himself for losing their daughter. He was consumed by guilt and unable to forgive himself. In the angel blood-induced hallucination, they found a way to express their pent-up emotions. When the vision ended, Brian rediscovered a sense of hope. He realized that life must go on and that they had to look forward. Brian then went to the therapy group and punched the group leader who had fallen for his wife. Feeling relieved, he returned home where his wife tended to his wounds. They reminisced about their early days of romance, recalling how wonderful everything once was. They rekindled their intimacy while the curious angel watched from the stairs. At that moment, the once dark and gloomy room filled with light. The angel then slit its own throat, and a torrent of blood gushed out, bathing the couple. In their minds, they saw the fading silhouette of their daughter. In the final scene, the angel's blood created one last vision. They arrived at a theater where their daughter, dressed in a pink ballet costume, smiled radiantly on stage. This encounter with the angel healed the couple's emotional wounds. Although they knew their daughter was gone, the angel gave them a chance to say goodbye. It was both tragic and romantic. In this story, the angel is interpreted as a metaphor for drugs, suggesting a dark story of a couple's ways to numb their overwhelming pain, ultimately losing themselves in hallucinations. Every time the couple experienced visions of their daughter, they heard the angel's cries. The angel was a metaphor for their child, whose blood could soothe their suffering. Guided by his daughter's spirit, Brian found a newborn abandoned baby in the trash bin. This child gave him the courage to move on and start anew. The couple, bathed in the happiness brought by this new life, resolved their differences and embraced a new beginning. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.